In this video we take a look at the right angle weave. Stay with me and I'll show you how. I recommend using bicones when learning the right angle weave, as this stitch can be quite fiddly, but bicones will want to naturally sit in the right position. We thread our needle with about an arm span of thread and pick up 4 beads. We slide them down to the end of our thread, leaving about a 6-inch tail, and we keep hold of the tail to stop the beads from falling off. We then sew back up through all 4 beads, coming in at the tail end. Our 4 beads should be joined together in a ring. We continue to sew on through the first bead, which the tail thread is coming out of. And we've completed our first unit, each unit consisting of a bottom, a top and 2 sides. We want to move our thread to this side bead furthest away from the tail. So we sew along through the top bead and then down through the side bead. And we're in position to start our next unit. Each new unit will share a bead with the previous unit, this bead that we're coming out of. So this is the first bead in our unit, so we only need to pick up 3 more beads. And we sew back down through that bead that we're coming out of. And we need to get back into position to put on our next unit. So we sew through this bottom bead and up through the side bead. This bead we're coming out of counts as the first bead in our next unit, so we only need to pick up 3 beads. And we sew back up through that first bead. We want to move our thread to come out of this outer bead, so we sew across through the top bead and down through the side bead, and we're in position to add our next unit. Pick up 3 beads and we sew back down through the bead that we're coming out of. And we need to move across to the outer bead, so we sew through the bottom bead and then back up through the side bead. Pick up 3 beads, sew back up through the bead we're coming out of, and sew across through the top bead. If you want to make this row longer, you can then sew down through the side bead and add more units, but now we're going to add another row, so we want to be coming out of the top bead. The first unit in this new row will share 1 bead in common with the previous unit, so this top bead from the last unit becomes the bottom bead for the next unit. Pick up 3 beads and sew back through the first bead we were coming out of. We need to reposition our thread to be coming out of this inner side bead, so we need to sew through all 3 of the beads again. For the rest of the row, each new unit will have a bead in common with 2 units, the top bead from the last row and the side bead from the previous unit. We sew through the top bead from the previous row, now the bottom bead in this new unit, joining those 2 beads together. Now we pick up 2 beads and we sew back down through the side bead from the previous unit. We need to move our thread across to the side bead from the unit, so we sew through the bottom bead, and up through the side bead, and we're in position to add our new unit. Pick up 2 beads, we sew through this bottom bead, and we sew back around through the 3 beads we've just added to come back to that side bead. Now we're coming out of the bottom of this bead, and we want to connect this bead to the top bead from the previous row. So we sew through, and we're in position to pick up more beads. Pick up 2 beads, and we sew down through that last side bead from the previous unit. And we want to continue sewing around until we're coming out of this new side bead. Now we're coming out of the top of this bead, so we pick up 2 beads, and we sew through this bottom bead, and back up through that side bead. And now we're at the end of the row, so we just want to sew through that top bead. And we're in position to add more rows. At the start of each row, we add 3 beads, and we sew back around through those 3 beads until we reach the side bead on the inside. When our thread is coming out of the bottom of a side bead, we sew through the top bead from the previous row, joining those 2 beads together. Then we add 2 beads and sew back around through that unit until we're coming out of the inner side bead. When we're coming out of the top of the bead, we pick up 2 beads and sew back through the top bead from the previous row. And we sew back around through all the beads until we come out of the inner side bead. Carry on until you reach your desired length. And that's how you do the right angle weave.